Let's go ahead and get into the next topic. Apparently, Ben Shapiro has debunked transgender ideology. Has anybody else heard of this? Is anybody else familiar with Ben Shapiro's big brain takes on transgender ideology? Well, if not, let's go ahead and pop that up. And while we're staring at his dumb face, if you have not hit the subscribe button already, or the bell notification icon, maybe now's a pretty good time to do it. And if you haven't checked out the other stuff that I do over on Suris on YouTube, and also Sunset City on YouTube, then maybe you should go do those things if you like taking a break from politics and maybe talking about video games for a little bit. All right. Now, let's go ahead and get into Benny Boy. I say get into. I'd rather not be anywhere near this man. I'd rather not be inside him in any way, shape, or form. But the things I do for you guys.
You are about to watch an episode of my awesome new series, Debunks, if I do say so myself. Seriously.
I don't think this is going to be awesome.
We are very proud of this show. Every episode, I dismantle and debunk a common leftist myth in 15 minutes or less. If you like what you see, head on over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Use promo code DEBUNK for 20% off. Become a member today because you can watch the entire first season right this instant.
Or, instead of doing any of that dumb shit, you could go to ddlgplayground.com and use coupon code Suris and get 10% off of anything you get there. You could probably get a plug adequately sized to visualize stuffing it right up Ben Shapiro's rear, and it would probably be incredibly cathartic. Or you could use it yourself. You could actually even get a plug that has a fluffy end on it that will allow you to just, I don't know, LARP being a real life furry. You do you. I'm not going to stop you. But if you are going to do something over at ddlgplayground.com, link in the description, I'd highly suggest you do it using my coupon code Suris. You get 10% off, and I get a little kickback from it as well. Anyway, come on, Ben. I'm going to stop talking about butt plugs, and we're going to start talking about you.
That is correct. You can binge the entire promo code Debunk.
No.
We're going to discuss a very common question. Can a man be a woman?
That's not the question that transgender ideology, in quotes, seeks to ask in the first place. Transgender ideology, quote, quote, asks, how do we define a man? Not, can a man become a woman?
Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field.
The specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex...
The answer, clearly...
Okay, so, if you haven't seen the original clip here, Dr. Levine actually does dodge this question twice. And I don't know why, because it's a very easy question to answer. Do you support government intervention on where children are concerned when we are talking about potentially medically necessary procedures? Yes. Duh. We do it all the time. I want you to imagine for a second a Jehovah's Witness parent, right? Now, Jehovah's Witnesses have a huge problem, at least they used to. I don't know if they still do, but they did for years, with allowing people to get blood transfusions because they deemed it to be an unclean practice and something that would get you sent to hell. So, what do we do when a child gets into a car accident and requires a blood transfusion to survive? The government, ideally, should step in and go, hey, I know you're worried about your kid going to an imaginary burning pit, but how about shutting the fuck up and we save their life? That's what we do. So, when we are talking about the question specifically as it was worded, though, there's another answer as well. And that is to point out, sir, I would like to answer your question, but it has been deliberately framed in such a way to be inflammatory and misrepresent the position of transgender medicine. Generally speaking, when we are talking about medicine for minors, we are not talking about amputational surgery. We are not talking about any of that. What we are talking about is puberty blockers. We are talking about buying children time so that they are not forced to go through their first puberty if they are potentially suffering from dysphoria, as an example, or their identity does not match up well with what their sex is. Puberty blockers are an excellent way of handling that. So pointing out either that, yes, we do support these things because government intervention in medically necessary procedures is already a precedent, and I am changing literally nothing, or pointing out that the way that the question is coming out is a deliberate misframing of transgender medicine, either way would work. Dodging the question here, probably not a good idea. But Ben's going to use this as his grandstanding podium, so let's go ahead and hear his points, insofar as we'll get points.
Is yes, as Levine even told a former Trump administration official. Just pause on that for a moment and think about how crazy that is.
Wait, hold on. So, Ben's question is, can a man become a woman? And then he plays a clip where Dr. Levine does not say that a man can become a woman. And then he says, the answer is obviously to them, yes. Take a minute to think about how crazy that is. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about what's happening here. This is an argument from intuition. This is Ben Shapiro relying on the audience's type 1 thinking. He's hoping his audience will intuit what he needs them to think for this particular thing. Because intuitively, if I say, can a man become a woman? To somebody who has not dealt with trans people, has not been part of this community, been part of this conversation, their first thought is going to be, no, a man's a man. A person with a penis is going to have a penis. A person with a vagina is going to have a vagina. That's going to be their intuitive first response, without delving a little deeper into what makes up sex, what makes up gender, etc. He's relying on that. He's relying 110% on you using your intuition and not your logic.
Now, in the past few years, you've heard a lot of statements that sound like we must not raise boys as boys and girls as girls because we just can't be sure that kids actually have the sex assigned to them at birth.
So I like the imagery he's using here. He shows all the surgical instruments and tries to argue that the left, quote unquote, is saying we shouldn't raise girls and boys as boys. Except I really don't hear that all that often. I'm sure there's a handful of people who think this, just like there's a handful of people who think they should raise their children in other stupid ways via things like, say, religion. But by and large, the idea that you should raise boys as boys or girls as girls is not really one that's contested all that much. Like, what does it even mean to raise a girl as a girl? Do you give them Barbies? Because in that case, if we raise a girl, dressing them in blue jeans and overalls and giving them Hot Wheels, are we now raising them as a boy? Or does this only count when we're raising a boy that has Barbies? I don't know. Food for thought. But let's continue.
You've heard that some people are men in women's bodies or women in men's bodies.
Which is largely a very, very old take that is not used that much anymore. The idea of a brain being in the wrong body is based off of research we did on cadavers ages ago, where the amount of gray and white matter in the brain that corresponded to a particular sex did not necessarily match up with the gender of a person after they died. So this rhetoric of right brain in the wrong body kind of got birthed from that. But that's not necessarily what's talked about these days. Because these days, we don't argue that things like medical necessity or dysphoria or anything like that are required for someone to be trans. Because we've largely agreed that that is kind of a biologically essentialist position, where you have to have some level of, say, internal suffering to be trans. Which isn't generally argued anymore. I'm not saying some people don't argue it. I just don't see it that much.
I even have heard that if you're a straight dude and you don't want to have sex with a trans woman, meaning a biological male, this makes you gay.
Okay, wait, what? Let's hear this one more time.
Men in women's bodies, or women in men's bodies. You may even have heard that if you're a straight dude and you don't want to have sex with a trans woman, meaning
if you're a straight dude and you don't want to have sex with a trans woman, you're gay? Who says that? I'm not saying it's not possible, but where I've heard that if you don't want to do that, maybe you're transphobic, because there's something about being trans that makes you not attracted to the person. I've heard that. I've not heard that makes you gay. And in fact, I would only believe that it makes you gay would be a problem for Ben's audience, because he largely caters to a homophobic audience anyway.
A biological male, this makes you gay. All of this is insane, patent nonsense.
Okay, so you say that this is all insane, patent nonsense, but you haven't brought anything up to argue against it yet, but I imagine that's what you're about to do here.
Males and females reproduce with one another in the human species.
Okay.
We've known this for quite a while. The simple reality is that the human species is sexually dimorphic. Sex is binary. We come in two brands, male and female.
Yes, kind of. So, sex isn't necessarily binary, it's more of a bimodal distribution. What I mean by that is, in a bimodal distribution versus a binary one, you have 2 points that are majorly represented in the data. So what we would consider a true biological male and a true biological female, those are very, 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 very represented in the data. 99% of people will fall into one of those categories. However, there are people with things like, say, Klinefelter syndrome, or people who... there's a term that I want to use, but I know it's largely considered an offensive term now, so I'll just say people who are born with both kinds of genitalia, as an example, who do not fall into these neat and clean categories. This is what makes it bimodal. Now, somebody will argue, well, no, sex isn't a spectrum, it's binary. Well, no, if we're saying it's binary, binary means there are only 2 options. There's only 2 things here. When we're arguing that something's bimodal, we're arguing that there is a range with 2 extremes. The 2 extremes being biological male, biological female. I think Ben might actually bring this up in the video, but let's see.
Typically, those who have the...
Wait, but you said typically. Why did you have to say typically? Why did you say in the previous statement, all people fall into one of these 2 categories, but then you had to say typically here?
XY chromosomes are male. Those who have XX chromosomes are female. Males and females differ. They differ in size and shape, and musculature, brain function.
Okay, so you've said that they differ, but can I go ahead and counter that everybody differs in size, in shape, in musculature? Merely saying that people differ is not enough to argue whether or not the category should be organized or reorganized.
As neuroscientist Steven Pinker says, differences between the sexes are part of the human condition.
Okay, but why do we care about Steven Pinker? Is Steven Pinker a biologist? Let's look here real quick. What is his field of study? Hold on. He conducts a research on a variety of topics in psychology and cognitive science. He's a psychologist. Wait, Ben, why are we citing the psychologist when we're talking about biology? This is an appeal to authority that has been completely thrown in the wrong direction. I would not ask an astrophysicist for a citation when I'm trying to figure out something about evolution, as an example. This is largely why we don't talk to, what's-his-face, Hugh Ross, as when we are talking about evolution. These appeals to the authority don't work, especially if the person's not even working in the field you're trying to appeal for.
There are certainly people who have anomalous genetic conditions, like Klinefelter syndrome,
Yes.
in which a person has 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome, and in whom breast development looks female while male genitalia are present.
Okay, so the existence of Klinefelters as an example is an argument that we have a bimodal distribution because there are outliers, as opposed to a binary where there are only 2 possible options. Ben.
Overall, disorders of sexual development affect 1 in every 5,000 births.
Okay, but intersex people account for what? Was it 1 and 2? 1 or 2 in every 100? Hold on. How many people are intersex? Estimates suggest about 1 to 2 in 100 people born in the United States are intersex. All right, let's do another one. Ben, how many people are redheads? Less than 2% of the world's population has red hair. So the same amount of people are redheads as people who are intersex. So Ben, if we were to use your logic, nobody has red hair. Red hair isn't part of the conundrum when we're talking about different types of hair color that people can possibly have. It should never factor into the conversation because it's so rare. The mere fact that it's rare does not mean that we should not account for it when we are dealing with our terminology, which again is why we have bimodal, not binary. If we only accepted blonde and brunette as hair colors, and then there were 2% of the population being redheads arguing, well, no, we've got hair color too. And there was some dummy arguing, no, you don't count. You only make up less than 2% of the population. That'd be a dumb argument there, and it's a dumb argument here.
Now, the presence of abnormal development does not mean that sex is a spectrum.
The presence of rare hair colors does not mean that hair color is a spectrum.
To suggest otherwise, it would be the same thing as saying that because 1 child every few thousand is born with 3 toes, this means that the number of toes in the human being is a spectrum.
Except it is. There are people who are born with 6 toes. There are people who are born with 4 toes. Now, by and large, typically, people are born with 5 toes. But it does not mean that the possible amount of toes that people are born with is always 5. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It's very rare, but it does happen.
Or that a person with 3 toes might actually be a sloth human, a 3-toed sloth human.
Nobody argues that. Nobody argues that, Ben.
All reproduction is rooted in the presence of sexual dimorphism.
Okay?
To pretend otherwise is biologically nonsensical.
Ben, when you're done fantasizing about trans people fucking and having kids, can we talk about the fact that the title of your video is transgender? Transgender. And if I do another Google search for fucking giggles, sex and gender are often used interchangeably despite having different meanings. Sex refers to the biological attributes in humans and animals, basically the entirety of your video. Gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender-diverse people. Wait. Ben, why are you talking about biology largely when you're talking about transgender people? Now, I can sit here and point out that sex is a bimodal distribution as well, just like gender is. I can do that all day long, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that you're talking about gender, but you're using information from sex. The fallacy you're committing right now is called a category error. All of your arguments are functionally in category A, But the topic you're talking about is in category B. But because you're demonstrating a fairly adequate knowledge of category A, even if the conclusions are incorrect, does not say anything about category B, which is the title of your video. Nakatar, thank you very much for the $5 super chat. Ben, did you know that there are other people in certain animal species so that there's only one sex in them? Also, Nagatar, that's the word that I have been told is apparently offensive now, which is why I'm not using it.
That's why, to end a conversation on transgenderism, just ask for a simple, non-self-referential definition of the terms man and woman.
Wait, non-self-referential, but when we're talking about gender, we are talking about roles. We are talking about performance. We are talking about identity. The only thing that exists here is referential. You can have this really... And you know what? We're just going to take the screenshot. We're just going to take it right here. You just became the thumbnail right there. But screenshots aside, we're just going to do that. For those who don't know, the very beginning of this stream, somebody mentioned me paying my taxes using a body pillow. So I was like, okay, let's quickly design a very bad body pillow. So... Here's your mental health break for the video. Apparently, there's a really shitty body pillow. Okay. But, anywho, the point is, Ben, you're trying to force people out of category B because you can't argue against category B. You're using information from category A because you cannot fight category B, apparently. Louis Cosmo, thank you very much for the $5 super chat. Ben doesn't know anything about sex in general. This was why WAP angers him so. It haunts him because he doesn't understand it. I love wordplay.
Say non-self-referential, I mean, you can't say, I feel like a woman, therefore I am a woman. For advocates of biology, the answer for what is woman or what is man is simple. You can look at chromosomes, SRY genes, reproductive systems, verifiable answers to the question.
I'm just going to say that the audio, he's cutting off his audio like a second before he finishes a word, or like a microsecond before he's done with the ending syllable, and it sounds very weird. Anyway, that's not an argument. That's not an argument. What is, though, is the fact that he's basically said you can't talk about gender in the way that gender is talked about in the field of academia, because I don't want you to. So we're going to talk about biology, which is not what gender is. It's kind of an absurd position.
For advocates of the position that some biological men are women, or vice versa, there is no standard that can be applied.
Yes, there is. Self-reference. Self-reference is a standard. If you come to me and you tell me, hello, my name is Martha, I am a female, or I am a woman, I'm not going to go, well, allow me to take out my sex tracker here. I just need to take a needle and shove it into your butt real quick. And now that I've done so, I have some of your blood, and I will use your trans fluids to determine whether or not you are actually a male or female. Nobody's going to do that. The reference point, the standard, is self-reference. And there's nothing wrong with that. Multiple societies over the course of history have had different understandings of gender because of the socially constructed nature of gender. Just as there are different societies that have had different ideas about race because of the socially constructed nature of race. But continue, Ben.
A man can become a woman or a woman a man at any time without any stable definition of man or woman whatsoever.
The stable definition is their self-reference. Their self-reference and their lived experiences. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It might make you uncomfortable, to which my answer is, and? Why should they care?
So according to our pseudo-medical activists, gender identity is completely separate from sex.
Yes.
The separation between gender and sex relies on a simple fallacy, that gender is entirely socially constructed and
That's not a fallacy.
thus separate from biology.
This is not a fallacy. A fallacy in informal logic has a name. Something you do can be fallacious, but it is not a fallacy. This is like when creationists say evidences.
Gender, in this iteration, would be all the various feminine qualities that adhere to womanhood, or the masculine qualities that adhere to being a male. According to these folks, gender and sex are completely different.
Yes, they are.
Right? All of those gendered notions of femininity, they're completely separate from being a biological female. This Cartesian notion that you can be a woman in a man's body, a soul in the machine, because your gender is separate from your sex, is utterly unsupportable at any level.
Okay, you say it's utterly unsupportable at any level, but do you reference anything here? Is there anything referenced here? Do you have sources? Anything? Now, when I do edited content, not live content, which this is edited content, so I'm perfectly comfortable criticizing this. When I do edited content, I tend to try to have sources. In fact, actually, if I were to pull up this debate, where is it? Here we go. If I were to pull up this debate here with this dumb advertisement at the top telling me to eat more protein or some shit. Hopefully, I see. Shut up, me! I don't want to hear me. This was a conversation about gender. In fact, actually, I'm going to link this in chat for anybody who wants to hear this conversation later. But this was a conversation that I had about gender, where I was supporting the position that gender is socially constructed. For the sake of this conversation, the top parts are the sources that I provided, and the bottom parts are the sources that my opponent provided. All the sources are available in the video itself. If you're going to say this isn't supported at any level, then I'm going to ask you where your citation comes from. Because I can pull mine out. I have citations. And have used them in the past. But go on, Ben.
Everyone understands there are some attributes that are generally considered more masculine. Chopping wood. Being dumb.
I'm whizzing with the door open.
Well, Ben, at least you have definitely shown us the performative attribute of being dumb per your male category. Thank you.
And I love it!
And some that are considered more feminine. Being caring, being nice, right? These are distinctions that do appear in virtually all cultures. Some of that is undoubtedly biologically oriented, and some is undoubtedly social construction.
Okay.
But it is simply ridiculous to suggest that if a boy is effeminate, he's actually a girl.
Nobody suggests that if a boy is effeminate, he's actually a girl. Because merely being effeminate does not make you a girl. Self-identity is what would. If you have not seen Ben, I'm just going to say this right now. I can name you femboys that can out-masculine you any day. Right now. Hell, I'll name one right now. Conyer. Conyer's more of a man than you'll ever be. There you go. That wasn't hard at all.
Or that if a girl is masculine, she might actually be a boy. But this is what gender theorists argue. The origins of the gender identity movement lie with a professor of medical psychology at Johns Hopkins in the 1960s. His name was John Money. After twin boys were born...
No, the study of this does not emanate from fucking James Money. He coined the term gender, but a lot of the actual research where gender is confirmed ends up coming from Lance Zimmerman and Candace Wallace.
And after a botched circumcision destroyed one boy's penis, That boy was raised as a girl. By the time that boy was a teenager, the boy felt extraordinary discomfort because he was biologically male, and his parents told him the truth. Both twins ended up killing themselves in their mid-30s. That didn't stop John Money from founding the Johns Hopkins Gender Identity Clinic in 1965. His theory was children could identify as members of the opposite sex, and that radical surgery was the proper solution. That inside, these kids were members of the opposite sex in reality, and that surgery would merely make their bodies align with their identity.
All right, so, Ben, would you like to know what actually has happened here? There's two things that have occurred here, Ben. Thing number one, you have found me a wonderful argument against circumcision. Now, I understand that you're Jewish, and so the idea of circumcising is very religiously motivated for you, but you've just found a wonderful reason why we should not be tampering with the genitalia of minors, especially in the early stages. Okay, now, secondly, Ben, what the David Reimer case demonstrates is literally that gender identity is immutable. That one cannot control their gender identity, because if they could, then David Reimer would not have suffered from dysphoria, and ultimately, we don't know if he would ultimately have taken his life later. We don't know that. But what we do know is that because he was forced to operate as a gender that he did not identify as, it ended up causing him immense mental suffering. So, Ben, since you've brought up the case that literally argues that forcing trans people or arguing against trans people operating as the gender that they identify as, or people in general operating as the gender they identity as, is a bad thing and is harmful, why is there still 5 more minutes of your video where I have to hear your stupid drivel?
Money claims that, quote, the gender identity gate is open at birth for a normal child, no less than for one born with unfinished sex organs, and would stay that way for at least a year.
Okay, but see, here's the thing. Nobody uses John Money's research when we are talking about gender largely anymore. In the field of academia, the things that Money put forward are thought of in the exact same way as the things that, say, Sigmund Freud put forward. Early steps in a field that was developmental. Which is why I pointed out that a majority of the information that is still used by sociologists today is not from Money. It's from Lance Zimmerman and Candace Wallace. I believe it's Candace Wallace. Somebody look up Doing Gender on JSTOR. I'm trying to remember if that is the name now. My memory fails me.
So in other words, you could have a full biological boy with finished sex organs, and his gender identity was still open. Brains and bodies were considered in direct opposition, completely separate from one another.
So, does the idea of neuroplasticity not mean anything here, where the brain can actually change over time? Is that... And maybe I'm misusing that word here. Maybe I'm misusing that term and stepping out of my field. But in general, nothing that James Money presented means that gender is not something that can be, say, fluid. None of it is something that... None of what James Money did ultimately makes the statement that one's gender is open incorrect.
Radical feminists like Judith Butler began arguing that all gender was socially constructed, and that therefore all inequalities in outcome between men and women could be laid at the feet of an evil, sexist society. If gender is a meaningless social construct created by society, why does it matter more than sex?
Because when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm asking them their name, I'm asking them their occupation, I'm asking them how much money they make, I'm asking them their gender, I'm asking them things that we largely have socially constructed. I'm not asking them, hello, sir or ma'am, do you have a penis? We generally don't ask people things about their basic biology. We ask them things that are largely socially constructed. It's what you encounter in day-to-day more often than anything else, Ben.
Which is actual real biology. And why is gender more real than biology itself?
Socially constructed things are not necessarily more or less real. Money is entirely socially constructed. Is it now not real? Well, no, it's real. It has a real effect on what we do day to day. Doesn't suddenly mean that it's not socially constructed.
Why would anyone need to change his or her body in order to align with gender?
Because if my identity is female and I look in the mirror and I do not see someone who looks female, that can cause me distress. It can cause me something called gender dysphoria. If I don't necessarily want to be female, but I also don't want to be male, I don't want to be either of these things, I may feel like making myself look more androgynous is better. If I am a cis female, as an example, I may put on makeup and do things to feminize myself further, getting myself more comfortable in my skin that way. Why do people modify their body at all in any way, shape, or form? The reasons are plentiful and nigh infinite. And I would think for somebody who calls himself, doesn't Ben call himself a libertarian, that the idea that individuals having an autonomous view of what they want to do with their body to make themselves more comfortable should be none of your business.
A social construction, when gender and sex are completely separate in the first place. Gender dysphoria, which is what we're talking about here, is a serious and tragic disorder. It is also extremely rare. According to the Diagnostic Institute,
Cancer is a tragic and serious issue. It is also extremely rare. Rare illnesses do not suddenly make them a problem. I can point out individual kinds of cancer that are extremely rare compared to other kinds of cancer, and it does not suddenly mean that those types of cancer don't need to be paid attention to.
Statistical Manual 5th edition, those who had received a diagnosis of gender identity disorder or transsexualism and were seeking hormone treatment and or surgery represented just 0.005 to 0.014% for males and 0.002 to 0.003% for females. Those stats are now rising dramatically.
Yes, because the stats that we would expect to see for people going to the doctor and actually having conversations in regards to gender will naturally go up as people learn that those are even options for them. We would also expect them to eventually plateau as it becomes normal. The amount of people identifying as gay went up significantly over the last 20 years as being gay in an open society became more and more normalized. This is to be expected as things become normalized.
We have that big announcement from an Oscar-nominated actor announcing he is transgender. Elliot Page came out publicly with a post about his identity.
And in that post, now liked nearly 2.5 million times, the more I hold myself close and fully embrace who I am, the more I dream, the more my heart grows, and the more I thrive. And guys, that's what we love to see.
Yes, he is going to help so many. Janae, thank you so much.
People suffering from gender dysphoria, which, in its non-politicized definition, means the persistent belief that you are a member of the opposite sex.
Wait, so what's the politicized one? Hold on, let's look up gender dysphoria real quick. The feeling of discomfort or distress that might occur in people whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth or sex-related physical characteristics. Transgender and gender nonconforming people might experience gender dysphoria at some point in their lives. Is this the politicized definition? Ben, are you going to give me the politicized definition, please? The persistent belief that you are a member of the opposite sex. At what point does this change? I feel like saying non-politicized means you get to argue that you have a special definition of this, and that it's very, very special to you, and I understand that you feel that way, Ben, but facts really don't give a shit about your feelings. Derek Gaines says, dysphoria these days is only a thing for insurance. Thank you very much for the super chat. Whoop.
Have a tragically high suicidal ideation and depression rate. That suicidal ideation rate remains tragically high after surgical and hormonal treatment.
Would you like to know why that is, Ben? We can apply Occam's razor. If one of the factors that leads to suicide in trans youth is dysphoria, and another factor that leads to suicide in trans youth is the effect their peers have on their mentality. And after getting surgery, the dysphoria is eliminated, but we still have the problem of acceptance by society. We still have the problem of family members. Could we not use Occam's razor to basically just point out that, Ben, you're the problem? The suicidality that results from all of this is a direct result of your actions. The things you do. How many people have seen this episode? 564,000 views on this episode. So if we point out that of these 564,000 people, each of these people is going to spread this nonsense to 5 or 10 more, which is certainly not outside the realm of possibility, especially in the age of the internet, and that through them spreading that message, somebody down the line ends up committing suicide due to the discomfort of the people around them that are feeding off of your bullshit, whether it is from your mouth or from somebody parroting you. We now enter this world where you don't really care about the suicidality because you're a cause of the suicidality. It's a direct response to people like you existing the way you do. And you can choose not to do this. You can choose not to say these things. You have every ability to. But unfortunately, it's profitable for you to do so, so here we are.
Longitudinal studies that are good just do not exist on the efficacy of these measures. And the mental health problems associated...
Wait. Is it that longitudinal studies don't exist, and thus we don't know? Or is it that these studies do exist, and thus we do know that the suicidality stays the same? Weird edit.
Associated with gender dysphoria remain extremely damaging, even in particularly accepting societies. But suffering from a mental disorder does not change your underlying sex, any more than believing that you are Napoleon Bonaparte makes you Napoleon Bonaparte.
Nobody argues that you can believe to be a different historical figure and then identify as that historical figure. We would classify that as a delusion. However, gender being a socially constructed thing, whereas Napoleon Bonaparte is an identity that was completely constructed by Napoleon Bonaparte, versus gender, which is constructed by society at large. There's a difference between identifying as an individual who you are not, and as a gender, which is merely a categorization of an individual. Napoleon Bonaparte is not a broad categorization of individuals that can include multiple people. It is an identity of a single person that can only include that single person. Gender is a broad category in which multiple people can slip into. This is a category error, Ben.
Transgender activists make an objective claim about reality, based on subjective internal feelings. That's unsustainable.
Ben, you can say it's unsustainable, and you can say it's all subjective, but identity is subjective. Can I also point out that having a 100% certainty of anything, which seems to be the thing that you're looking for, goes 110% against the idea of the scientific method. Science does not determine what is or is not true. That truth exists irregardless of the scientific method. The scientific method gives us a pathway for determining whether or not something is more or less likely. We cannot say anything with 100% certainty because the laws with which we try to conceptualize the world tend to break down in different areas. Newtonian physics, as an example, is certainly an accepted science. However, Newtonian physics tend to break down as you exit our local group. And then Albert Einstein's theory of relativity has to actually take hold instead. But even that breaks down the further you get to, or the closer you get to the singularity, where time, matter, and space tend to work differently at the point of the Big Bang than what we understand even with the theory of relativity. This is why nothing in science is 100%. This is why nothing in science can be 100%. There's a lovely quote from the book The Philosopher's Toolkit, and that is that science is an abandonment of common sense, and it is an abandonment of 100% certainty. It is within the parameters of accepting that common sense is wrong, and 100% certainty can never be guaranteed, that the scientific method can work and the field of science can flourish. But Ben seems to not understand these things. He seems to want rock-solid answers for things that have a degree of variance.
What's more, transgender activists demand that you abandon reason, biology, privacy, even the ability to raise your kids.
Wait, privacy and the ability to raise your kids? Where did that come in?
It's in concert with reality in favor of a delusional quasi-religious worldview in which gender and sex are completely segregated and...
A quasi-religious worldview? It's literally accepted by sociologists. It's literally accepted by one of the fields in soft science. And, oh, by the way, before somebody tries to point out that soft sciences aren't science, he brought up Steven Pinker, who's a psychologist, and psychology is also a soft science.
A boy can be a girl and a girl a boy. Now,
nobody argues that a girl can be a boy and a boy can be a girl. We argue that you are a boy, or you are a girl, or you are an NB. Now, you could be gender fluid, in which you have a self that can be a girl at one point, and then a self that can be a boy, but there's no point where the boy becomes a girl, or the girl becomes a boy. You, yourself, as an identity, exists outside of gender, and then it falls into one of those categories, either because of the world around you, or your self-identification. But that might be a little too nuanced for Benny Boy.
Now, none of this means that anybody suffering from gender dysphoria ought to be mistreated. Anybody with any sort of disorder ought to be treated with nothing but sympathy and care.
Okay, but what does sympathy and care mean, Ben?
But this does mean that a society that seeks to propagandize to children that they...
That's just the fucking drag story hour. That's literally just drag queens who largely are cis anyway. Yeah, there are trans drag queens, but a lot of them are fucking cis. Just reading books to children. Why is that the image that you chose for this?
They can switch their gender is both lying to kids and doing them psychological harm in the process. Unfortunately, that's exactly what our society...
Can you provide evidence that it is engaging in psychological harm? Outside of the wonderful argument against circumcision that was the James Money case? Because the James Money case also ends up working in favor of not forcing a particular gender on your kids, not actually the argument that you're trying to make. Are you gonna evidence that claim?
Society is now teaching kids in public schools anti-biological nonsense, including the lie that you might just be a different gender with different pronouns. And it's not just that. With the new Equality Act,
the motion is adopted.
The Biden administration and the Democratic Party are seeking to promote the idea that any institution that doesn't mimic these lies has to be destroyed.
The Equality Act does not say that, Ben.
Institutions are not exempted from federal regulations that demand that men who identify as women be treated as women. And this is true in sports, in restrooms. Ironically, feminists who sought to protect women from men have now seen female spaces completely destroyed because they can't define female and male properly.
Wait, hold on. Is women's sports destroyed? Because if I look up the top 10 performing female athletes, I will largely find cis women. Here. Top 10 performing female athletes. I expect to find all trans women here. Right? That's what I expect to find, right? I don't want to purchase a subscription. Jesus fucking Christ. So, you know what? Here's a bit of homework. Pause the video right here. And if at least the majority, if at least 5, half this list, are not trans, then Ben's entire argument about the world of female sports being destroyed is absolutely fucking bonkers. Because it is in direct opposition with reality. we would in fact call his position delusional, as it is not reflective of the reality in which he lives, and yet he asserts it is true. So please, if you're watching this in post, go into the comment section and please tell me how many of the people on that list were cis. Because if it is not 5 or less, then Ben's point is fucking stupid. All right. With that said, though, I think we've tolerated enough of Ben Shapipi's nonsense today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Please let me know what you thought in the comment section below. I know this is a longer episode than normal, but if he's going to play Debunker, then I'm going to have to play Debunker for this particular thing. That said, let me know what you thought in the comment section. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Please check out Neko Suris and Sunset City when you get the chance. As always, though, everyone, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Insert end of video tagline here.